Welcome back to the story of Ruth Ellis, London's most infamous femme fatale, whose life was as tumultuous as it was glamorous. In this episode, we delve into a chapter of love, obsession, and danger. Part 3, Love Triangle. After returning to the nightlife of Knightsbridge, Ruth reinvented herself as a nightclub manager and attracted a glittering array of suitors from across Europe and beyond. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Ruth found herself entangled in a dangerous love triangle. Their rivalry, fueled by desire, ambition, and jealousy, would set the stage for a love story and a tragedy that would captivate the nation and spark debate about the UK's justice system. I'm Esther, host of Once Upon a Crime, and this is part 3 of Hanged, Ruth Ellis and the Price of Passion, Love Triangle. By the end of 1951, Ruth Ellis was done pretending. Whatever dreams she'd once held of a quiet domestic life had evaporated, leaving her with 2 children to support and nowhere to turn but back to the shadows she knew best. So Ruth returned to the night. She decided to go back to work as a nightclub hostess. Dyeing her hair platinum blonde, she embraced her newfound confidence and possibly her new independence. Ruth changed more than just her hair. She was now going by Ruth Ellis, a small but deliberate way of rewriting her life story. She went back to the court club, though it too had changed. Now it was called Carol's. It had been remodeled into a full-blown nightlife experience. Cabaret, dancing, a restaurant, and late-night entertainment. Open until 3 a.m. Her old boss, Morris Conley, welcomed her back. He gave her a flat just off Oxford Street, close enough to the club to be convenient for clients. She described those years as her happiest time, and maybe in some ways they were. At Carol's, Ruth was a star, elegant, flirtatious, and in control, at least on the surface. She wore fine clothes, drank top-shelf champagne, and attracted wealthy men from across the globe. She was popular, poised, and paid handsomely. Summer 1953. Ruth Ellis was about to find herself at the center of an even more tangled web of ambitions, desires, and rivalries. In August, her career took a significant step forward. Maury Conley offered her the position of manager at the Little Club, a new upscale venue nestled in Bridge. It was a place of elegance. A designer goods shop and a high-end hair salon were on the ground floor, and across the street, the Grand Hyde Park Hotel loomed. Ruth eagerly accepted. She now oversaw a staff of 4, a doorman and 3 hostesses. She was proud to be the youngest club manager in London. Her new role came with perks, a rent-free second-floor flat just above the club where she could keep an eye on her children. It was her first home with her children, a place where she could be both boss and hostess, and where she could entertain her wealthy, influential clients. Ruth was making money, real money, and for the first time, she had power. Mayfair's bars and clubs had become magnets for a different kind of man, racing car drivers, young, rich, and reckless. It was in this world, fueled by speed, booze, and testosterone, that Ruth met the 2 men who would define her final years, Desmond Cussen and David Blakely. Ruth met Desmond first. Desmond, 31, was from a respectable family. After the war, where he served in the RAF, he returned to business, joining the board of his family's successful tobacco firm, Cusson & Co. Desmond was shy, well-mannered, and somewhat socially awkward. He was a racing enthusiast, although he never competed professionally. His car, a sleek black Ford Zodiac, was as refined as he was, luxurious, stylish, a reflection of his restrained elegance. He was a man of quiet passions. To Ruth, Desmond offered something rare, quiet stability. He was affectionate and generous. He didn't pressure her. Desmond fell in love with Ruth and offered her everything she'd previously thought she wanted: home, family, and money to spend. But with her newfound independence, Ruth wasn't ready to be tamed. Just days after Ruth's encounter with Desmond, she found the spark and drama missing in her life, in the form of a different kind of man, David Moffat Drummond Blakely. He was 24, dark-haired, intense, and handsome. They first met at Carol's, and David didn't make a good first impression. He wore an old sports coat and flannel trousers and took in the club with open contempt. He called it a den of vice. When Ruth approached him that night, he didn't even look her in the eye. "I suppose you're another one of these hostesses," he said offhandedly. Ruth, always quick with a line, snapped back, "No, as a matter of fact, I'm an old has-been." She muttered to one of her girls, "Who is that pompous little ass?" She answered, "That's David Blakely, another driver." Ruth turned back to her drink. "I hope never to see that little shit again." But fate, as it often does, had other plans. David Blakely, born June 17, 1929, was the youngest of 5 children. The Blakely family was well established and wealthy enough to afford boarding schools and nanny care for the children. But behind the polished veneer of David Blakely's early life lurked a dark drama. David's father, Dr. John Blakely, was a respected Sheffield physician. He was arrested and charged with the murder of Phyllis Staton, his 25-year-old mistress. It all began in 1932, when Dr. Blakely started an affair with Phyllis, an unemployed waitress. By January 1934, Phyllis was pregnant. She left home without informing her parents, claiming she'd found a new job. Late that month, Phyllis returned home, gravely ill. When her mother opened the door, Phyllis collapsed onto the doorstep, crying, "I think I'm dying." Her mother saw a car driving away as her daughter fell. But who'd driven her home, Phyllis refused to say. She was rushed to the hospital, diagnosed with septicemia, blood poisoning, and died within hours. The autopsy revealed Phyllis had been about 4 months pregnant and had suffered a miscarriage 5 to 10 days earlier. The medical examiner was unable to determine whether the death was natural or due to foul play. The police intervened. When they opened an investigation, their attention turned immediately to one man, Dr. John Blakely. Under intense questioning, Blakely admitted to the affair. He claimed Phyllis was involved with 3 other men. He accused her of choosing him as the father because he was well off. She'd wanted an abortion, he said, and he told her it was illegal. There was nothing he could do. Phyllis later called him, saying that she'd had a miscarriage and needed help. He admitted to picking her up in his car and transporting her home, but said he was shocked to learn she had died. Evidence told a different story. A journal found in Phyllis's bedroom and written in Dr. Blakely's handwriting contained a timetable for inducing labor. Capsules and a vial of liquid used to bring on labor were discovered. The police arrested Dr. Blakely on suspicion of murder. The case made headlines. After hearing all the testimony on both sides, the judge dismissed the charges, citing weak evidence. Despite the community's shock and the controversy surrounding the verdict, Dr. Blakely remained free to practice medicine. But the scandal had shattered his family. David was just 5 years old when his father was tried for murder. He was too young to understand the headlines, but not too young to feel a tension that enveloped the Blakely home like smoke. In 1940, his mother, Annie Blakely, filed for divorce. It was granted on the grounds of adultery. A year later, she remarried Humphrey Wyndham Cook, a former racing car driver from a distinguished family. They moved to an upper-class neighborhood just off Park Lane, near Hyde Park. Humphrey was generous with Annie's children, especially David. He shared his love of motor cars and treated David like a son. David was the baby of the family and had been spoiled and insulated from responsibility all of his life. His siblings shielded him, and his mother indulged him, perhaps overcompensating for the pain of the scandal. The result was a boy who never had to try. David attended the best private schools, but school was never David's strong suit. His reports were bleak, too spasmodic, lax resolve, scatterbrained, backward, Badly spoiled, they read. One teacher wrote, "At this rate, David hasn't the faintest chance of passing his exams." He didn't. He failed to earn his school certificate and left without graduating. He was 16, directionless, and uninterested in anything that demanded effort. His obsession was racing cars. His stepfather, aware of the costs, tried to steer him towards more respectable pursuits, but racing remained David's only passion. In 1950, his stepfather gifted him a used HRG sports car. At just 21, David's dreams soared. He entered some races. For David, racing was more than just a hobby. It was his calling. There was just one problem. He wasn't very good. He had no wins, no sponsors, and no plan. And with no income to speak of, he reluctantly accepted a trainee position, arranged by his stepfather, at the luxurious Hyde Park Hotel in Knightsbridge. But David had no real interest in working. He preferred to spend his days charming older women, often married, who paid for his drinks, slipped him cash, and didn't demand much in return. Then, in 1951, David met Anthony "Ant" Seton Finlitter, an automobile engineer whose father had been a legendary pre-war race car driver. Ant worked for Aston Martin, but couldn't afford a car of his own. So when David offered him £10 a week to help rebuild the HRG and race together, Ant jumped at the chance. They became partners, sharing costs and co-driving in handicap races. The HRG even snagged a third-place finish. And then, David did what he often did. He crossed the line. Ant's wife Carol was a striking woman, and by the summer of 1951, she had left her husband to run off with David. But when she later returned to her husband and confessed the affair, David's response was cold and calculated. "You stupid bitch, who the bloody hell will tune my car now?" Ant, astonishingly, took her back. Even more astonishing, he forgave David too. The two men resumed their partnership. By late 1951, they had a few race wins under their belt, and David began investing his energy, and later his inheritance, into building a new racing prototype he named the Emperor. In February 1952, David's father died, leaving him £7,000, roughly £250,000 in today's money. He poured a good portion of it into racing. He was sacked from his job at Hyde Park Hotel after missing too many shifts and getting into a drunken brawl with a banquet manager. He landed a new job, again thanks to family connections. That lasted only a short time. "I can't stand work," he told a friend. "It drives me potty." His real goal remained clear: to be a successful race car driver and playboy. In 1952, he met Miss Mary Newton Dawson, 20, daughter of a wealthy Yorkshire manufacturer. He got engaged, hoping to marry into money, but continued his womanizing ways. He drank heavily and got into fights. He was reckless and obnoxious, squirting seltzer at other clubgoers, pouring ice down rival drivers' backs. And yet, women were still drawn to him. But in 1953, at a newly opened bar in Kensington, he met the woman who would love him to death. In 1953, Ruth threw a lavish party to celebrate the grand opening of her new club, the Little Club. The very first drink she ever poured at the Little Club was for David Blakely. She recognized him instantly from their run-in a few weeks earlier at Carol's. He smiled at her now, with a mischievous grin on his smug face. But she had to admit it, he was handsome. Although newly engaged, David began drinking at the Little Club nearly every night. Within 2 weeks, he and Ruth were lovers. David began spending more and more time at her flat. In December, Ruth became pregnant. David offered to marry her, but she declined. "I didn't want to take advantage," she said. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Instead, the relationship grew more toxic, more volatile, and more codependent with every passing week. When Ruth Ellis first began her dalliance with David Blakely, she thought she knew what she was getting into. Another charming playboy, easy on the eyes, but ultimately not worth the trouble. David drank too much, pulled childish pranks, and picked fights when he didn't get his way. But despite all this, something about him drew Ruth in deeper. At first, she played her usual games, teasing, testing, and even provoking him to stir jealousy. But David's infatuation with Ruth quickly became more than just a passing fancy. When she didn't immediately fall in love with him or bend to his whims, David's desire for her only grew stronger. It was a volatile match, and everyone could see it. They had loud, very public arguments. Ruth began to question whether the romance was worth it. She later reflected, "I began to think it was time the affair ended, because we were getting too involved and my business was suffering." Morris Conley, her landlord, had started charging her rent, citing David's constant presence as the reason. Jealousy was brewing on all sides. But perhaps to prove she wasn't David's plaything, Ruth began playing a game of cat and mouse with his affections. She turned her attention to Desmond Cussen, the shy, gentlemanly man who spent a lot of time and money at her club. She knew Desmond was infatuated with her, but she didn't feel the same. Still, she flirted, laughed, and raised his expectations, all to make David jealous. And it worked. But now, David became more possessive and started verbally abusing Ruth, accusing her of tarting around. Ruth, her confidence restored, pushed back, reminding him that she was still a working girl, free to entertain clients and sleep with whomever she chose. Spurred by his growing desire for Ruth, David would suddenly make time for her again. This cycle would repeat several times a week, a game of romantic tug-of-war that no one could win. June 1954 marked a turning point. David left London to race at Le Mans, promising to return just before his 25th birthday on June 17th. His birthday came and went, and Ruth heard nothing. She became increasingly angry as time went on. Her jealousy intensified, leading her to invite Desmond to sleep with her for the first time, setting the stage for even more conflict and chaos. David finally sent Ruth a cheeky postcard from France, ending it with, "P.S. Love to Desmond," a clear message that he knew about her infidelity. Despite this, David's feelings only deepened. He wanted Ruth more than ever, and his clinging, possessive behavior grew worse. Ruth later testified that she thought her affair with Desmond might push David away. Instead, it made him more determined to control her. Even though David was still cheating with multiple women, he couldn't stand the thought of Ruth with anyone else. The final blow came one night when Ruth threw a belated birthday party for David at the club. He arrived late, almost midnight. Ruth was enraged at this latest humiliation and refused to acknowledge him. Then David pulled out his trump card. He took Ruth aside and announced he'd just broken off his engagement with Mary Dawson. It worked. Ruth melted. From that moment on, Ruth said, quote, "I'm afraid I allowed myself to become very attached to him." They talked of marriage. They exchanged promises. But still, the betrayals didn't stop. Ruth kept Desmond close, and David kept other lovers too. The breaking point came one night when David returned one evening to sleep in Ruth's flat. According to Ruth, he stretched over to switch off the light, and she noticed, quote, "love bites all over his shoulders, back, and neck. I went quite cold with shock, and I told him to get out and leave the flat." David grew desperate to win her back. For 2 days, she refused to see him. He came crawling back in tears, saying, "I'm sorry, darling. I'll prove I love you." And he proposed marriage. Ruth accepted his proposal, allowing herself momentarily to believe in a happy ending. As you might have already guessed, Ruth and David's love story will not end with "and they lived happily ever after." Their mutual jealousy and obsession would soon spiral into rage and violence. The obsession that grew between them ultimately led to their tragic ending. Join me next week for part 4 of Hanged, Ruth Ellis and the Price of Passion. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell to be notified whenever I upload a new video. If you'd like to hear the entire audio version of this episode, listen to it on the Once Upon a Crime podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. You can find all our episodes as well as get links to our social media channels on our website, truecrimepodcast.com.